So in this part of the lecture we begin to consider the idea of utopia, and of course we have to consider Thomas More, who came up with the idea of utopia in his novel Utopia, which is which you can borrow from the Cardiff Library. I thought I'd point that out, which is a novel, and it is the name given to the imaginary island nation which is peaceful, tolerant, and has certain religious allusions. Thomas More, of course, was a civil servant, a thinker, a writer, but also worked on behalf of the Catholic Church. He was a bit of a fanatic. For somebody that advocated peace, he did show a lot of religious intolerance, funnily enough. But utopia now is sort of as the perfect society, if you like, if we look at the dictionary definition. So I thought I'd put that in the lecture. And it's inspired writers, artists. The idea of utopia, Thomas More's novel, and the idea of utopia has inspired all types of people and creative types, filmmakers, as we alluded to earlier with reference to the Wizard of Oz. And it's also influenced people who, some people who write about business and business organisations and business ethics. Most prominent of which is Martin Parker. Now, I included an extract from his chapter, from two of his chapters from the book, the edited book, Utopian Organisation, and the feedback I've had is that it's what he has to say about utopia, that is the extract which starts with the 9/11 attacks, is very difficult to understand. But basically what he's saying is two things. And the first thing is this, that the idea of what he calls free market or managerial capitalism was at one time a utopian idea. It didn't exist as a dominant or prevalent economic or social or organisational system at one time, but it was a utopian idea, and it's now become commonplace that we really don't question free market managerial capitalism, and what was once a utopian idea is now thought of as normal and natural. And he seems to suggest that we think of managerial capitalism as something that has always existed. But he says that actually it was once a utopian idea that very much existed on the margins of society, and there were other systems in place, but has since become a dominant, you could argue it's become the dominant economic system of our age. And he argues that any alternatives to free market capitalism are dubbed crazy utopian ideas. And this is what he means by there being the actual idea of utopia being a fragile one, and one over which there is a great deal of debate. And so keep that in mind. The second thing he says about utopia is, in the extract I include in Seminar 3, is that utopian ideas should offer real alternatives, but they should be based on slightly outlandish or slightly odd, or if you like crazy, impractical ideas about how to organise businesses or organisations. For example, More's utopia was a society without money or private property. Now you'd think that would never be something you could never imagine, but think again, and I showed this clip as a way of illustrating the point in the lecture.
Here in the heart of Massachusetts' Berkshire Hills, traders would rather you leave your credit cards and dollars behind and pay them in these Berkshires, a homegrown currency that's forging a truly local economy.
The
The small town of Great Barrington is perhaps an unlikely front line in the fight against globalisation. But several banks and some 250 businesses are now accepting Burke shares in an attempt to keep cash in the community and support local trade. 835,000 Burke shares have been printed and more than 500,000 are in circulation.
We've probably touched 1 million Burke shares here in the bank because they're coming in, getting exchanged for different denominations, things like that. So it's been very, very popular.
Having looked at utopian ideas, this section of the lecture asks the question, why are we suspicious of going to utopia? In other words, I wanted to bring out some of the concerns philosophers, writers, academics have had with the idea of utopia. And I want to try and explain here why there is certain criticism, inherent criticism and suspicion over utopian idealism. I thought I'd include this quote from W.B. Yeats. What I wanted to do here was show that the anti-utopians certainly have the upper hand over the utopians, I think, as far as 20th century and 21st century thought is concerned. And this is the reason why I think the likes of Orwell through to Huxley and Rorty and others are suspicious of utopian idealism. It's because of this.
People are standing in the street in tears, people are panicking and
Wann werden wir wieder emporsteigen, genau wie die Väter einst auch Deutschland nicht das Geld erhielten, sondern uns selbst den Schlappen mussten.
Problem with utopian idealism is that it's often associated, Russell Jacoby suggests here, with insane dictatorships such as Hitler, such as that overseen by Stalin. Although Jacoby argues that actually utopian thinking has got nothing to do with these ethnic or religious or nationalist style dictatorships. Having looked at this, I go on to consider another fundamental concern with the idea of utopia, and it's nicely summarised in a discussion on Radio 4's Thinking Aloud involving Ash Amin, and this is what he says about utopian thinking.
I began the discussion by asking Professor Ash Amin whether he agreed that there was a noticeable absence of utopian thought in today's world.
I think there are lots and lots of little utopian projects around the world, from slow food through to young people wanting to live with the environment in a more conducive and positive way. But I think the big idea of utopia seems to have disappeared. Of course, there are so many different reasons, but one reason possibly, it's something that I've been musing over, is we live in times in which the market philosophy, the idea of market society, has almost overtaken everything in sight, and so we've forgotten how to imagine a future beyond market society, beyond our times, and anything that looks vaguely different from what is known as the neoliberal project appears to be almost inconceivable.